Based off the conversation that we just had, things in our industry are changing at an incredibly rapid pace. We're trying to make our networks catch up with the systems that are far more flexible than what our networks have been. And this is happening in a lot of different arenas, and we're having to keep up with a lot of new things in a lot of different places than what network engineers traditionally have had to know. So what are we doing around this table to keep up with all of the craziness that is currently the network space?
Read lots.
Listen to podcasts, read a lot, watch videos from Tech Field Day.
Don't be afraid to learn.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is don't be afraid to get back onto the box. If you haven't been on the box in a year, 2 years, 3 years, now's the time to kind of experience a lot of these things firsthand. If it's networking and Linux, or if it's containers or microservices, if it's automation APIs, just experience it. That we can at least have a better opinion on how hard it is or how easy it is to get started with some of those tools and technologies.
So at least a lot.
Go ahead, John.
At least a lot of the stuff now, at least in terms of getting hands-on, so much stuff now you can get as a VM, and that's a huge difference from back in the day when you either used it at your work or you had to go buy hardware. It's kind of nice to play with some of these things virtually and then move on and do something else, and you've lost nothing, right? So there is at least some way of getting up to speed on some of these things.
But there has to be a deep understanding that it's a different paradigm. When I have family and friends talk with me about, you've been with such and such a company for 3 years, 2 years, aren't you supposed to be there for 40 years and get a gold watch? And how you advance in the industry, how you develop professionally and do the things that we love to do. I think there needs to be something it's almost transcendent beyond just, how do I, watching videos online. But there's got to be a desire to continue to improve. Because if you're hanging out in some company for a bunch of years, yeah, you might, go up the steps if you work for, whatever, then you get a little bonus. But man, you get stale really fast. And so yeah, the last switch I configured was a 2950, and I can do a no switch port, and I can do a no shutdown, great. And you don't know what things are going on now. So where do you derive and then develop that inner drive and desire to continue to move forward? Maybe it's just I want to continue to find more lucrative work. Maybe it's money, or just a passion. So I think that's a problem I've seen with some of my students, some of my colleagues, not really colleagues, but coworkers, let's say it that way, where they just get stale. So where do you get that from? I don't know the answer to that.
I get it from hating my colleagues.
You want to move on? Yeah, well, listen, I think a big motivator is the financial reward. I know that if I learn these new skill sets, the market rewards that in a certain way, depending on the market that you're in. Maybe the work becomes more interesting. I can prove those kind of things. So there are those.
I think it's different at different. What you need, a lot of people, especially young people, don't realize is that your life changes. So your lifestyle at 20. As I seem to remember it, and it's a long time ago, seemed to involve cars, girls, and alcohol. Oh, and going to work, right? And I needed more money, but only because it got me more girls and alcohol, right?
You were paying for them? Okay.
and there was, and then when I was 30 and I'd married, and it was about buying furniture and having nice meals. And now when I was 40, it's about paying for school fees and worrying about the future of your daughters. And now that I'm 50, it's about I've got to retire. And at each of those stages, my career has focused on different aspects. It's not necessarily about money. It might be about having a career that takes me home. Like, for example, there are times in my life where I've taken low-paying jobs just to be closer to home, even though I've been offered higher-paying jobs. Sometimes I've taken higher-paying jobs. So the only career advice I give to people is two things. First of all, in networking, RFC 1925, Rule 11. Everybody should memorize RFC 1925, Rule 11, right? And that is that every old idea will be proposed again with a different name or a different presentation, regardless of whether it works.
Full disclosure, it's on his screen.
He was reading, definitely.
I wanted to make sure it was literal. And
what you're going to pull with sufficient thrust, pigs fly just fine.
That's right. That's rule number 2 or 3. The most important part about that is that networking is full of fundamentals. An IP packet is an IP packet. A frame is a frame. Learn the fundamentals. So when you go to those training courses and you learn stuff, don't learn that if you do conft no shut that the interface doesn't shut. Think about what's actually happening in terms of the electrical signals. And the frames will then egress from the port. And as your career builds over time, and in my case, by the time I got to about my mid-30s, because I'm stupid, I eventually worked out that everything was the same thing over and over. So now, these days, IPv6 looks a lot like IPX next generation, IPX-NG. Back in the late 90s, it was IP, remember? It never went anywhere, but we all spent a lot of time learning how to make the next generation of IPv6. Or Apple Talk Protocol learned me a lot about the current way that Apple does multicast DNS. Sorry?
Auto-configuration
Auto-configuration protocols and why they don't work.
Yeah.
You know, there are lots of things in networking that just get repeated over and over and over again. And eventually you build up a base of knowledge which allows you to build a pyramid that you then can move into SDN or start to learn Linux or Python.
The nice thing about pyramids is, though, they're kind of recursive, because no matter where you started them, they still look like pyramids. They're just a little bit shorter. And that's, I had this argument about, do I ask people in technical interviews, do I ask them how ARP works, IP ARP, right? And someone was like, well, okay, so can you put a scope on an Ethernet and tell me what's going on? I'm like, no, of course I can't. That stuff went out donkey's years. And they're like, well, why should they understand ARP? That stuff just kind of works, right? And you don't get a scope and put it on an Ethernet cable anymore, because that stuff kind of just works. And at some point, the base of that pyramid has to move up, because there's no way you can go back and there's no point. So I'm kind of with you that I do believe having an understanding of the fundamentals is important. Yeah. But at the same time, you know, if you look at people who program, very, very few people who can program in an assembler these days. More's the pity, right? But
while I am very sad that my knowledge of token ring routing information fields has faded away.
Well, that's your CTI research gone then.
I think there's something else here that maybe we're not looking at, and I think that's the pyramid for a lot of us is flipped over. When we started out, the possibilities were like this. And as we learned that stuff, more possibilities were there, and more, and more. Now you're starting with somebody today who's up here, and it's so wide. Where do they go back to?
No, it was always that wide. When I started off, I was working on thick coax, right? And there was always just so much going on. It was Solaris and HPUCs and DEC PDP-11s, and it's always been that much. You just start here. The first step of the journey is the first step of 1,000.
Now, Greg, I'll disagree a little bit there, because what's changed from 20 years ago, let's say, and now is the availability and ready availability of the information.
Yeah, it's easier.
It was much tighter, much more scoped and specific. What it was, I'm going to be an MCSE, I'm going to get this set of books, I'm going to pass it, and off you go. As opposed to now, it's Google gives you everything and tons of stuff and news coming at you constantly, and there's a new thing you got to check out now, and we're part of that problem right here in this room, doing what we do, all of us as bloggers, as participants in Tech Field Day. I don't mean that in a negative way. Hey, we built a business on it, but I think back to the original question: how do you keep up? You have to pick technology that is applicable to you in the world that you're in and go after it. Because you can't deep dive on everything. To have value, you need to have a deep understanding of something particular. So choose that thing, whatever it is. My network could benefit from automation, so if I got a handle on APIs and Python, maybe you can put that to immediate use in your network. Fine, dive in on that, go after that, and don't worry about how the Open Daylight controller works, because maybe that doesn't help you as much in your particular environment. Grab something and go deep instead of staying an inch deep on 15 things.
And it's important, I think, to remember that for that specific angle of this, just remember, perfect is the enemy of good. You don't need to be a master at all of these things, from day one. I think, to your point, you sort of pick a lane and focus on that, and sort of say no to things that are the ooh shiny kind of things, because you know what you want. And I think that places more of an emphasis on the engineer knowing what they are trying to achieve out of their career. So it does require a little more planning on the beginning. And thankfully, I think we're actually starting to get through to some of these vendors to provide the tools for those of us that want to do that. We're in an age, sort of for the first time in a long time, that we as customers, and I'm speaking from a customer perspective now, we have much more power than we used to. We don't have to look to the vendors for literally every solution now. I mean, they have their place for sure, but I think we're approaching a period of time where we can take back a lot of control, and should. So that plan that out, figure out how you can contribute to that model, and then just stick with it.
I think to Ethan's point, though, like, I think you have to specialize, right? You have to pick one or two areas that you want to be good at and have a significant depth in. But then I think the other point is having those fundamentals, that base, allows you to be more of a generalist in the broader other interesting categories, right? Like, Matt and I talk about this all the time. The problem is, like, all of this is super interesting, right? I would love to spend time looking at DWDM more and other stuff, but do you want to be a generalist in everything? And some people, I think, are good at that. They want to be that person.
And you even need to be in a modern data center.
Yeah, but there are certain categories, I mean, that you should focus on. And the other piece of that is when you become good at that, then it's your responsibility to become a mentor to someone else so they can learn that too, right? This is like a two-way street.
Say a wrench into the specialization, right? And I don't disagree with the concept, is the fact that our businesses are now demanding more and broader levels of knowledge as our infrastructures are collapsing, right? So, you know, a server platform is no longer just a server platform. You now have networking, storage, all kinds of components tied into it. And we need, I keep hearing this all the time, and I don't disagree with the sentiment, we need infrastructure engineers, which does mean that the level of knowledge is becoming broader.
And I'll concur with that. I've advocated for that in writing, but I still think, you know, two things. One is, all of us that are working on an infrastructure team, each of us, whoever we are going to have some specialization still, but have an obligation to understand how the other things work. In other words, the silos are going away, right? Just because of what you just described. So, you know, the other piece of this is we were talking about how do you keep up with new stuff. Well, you can't keep up with all the new stuff. And so my point about specializing there is pick a few new things to work on and don't worry about all the new things to work on because you'll never be able to get enough of a mastery of it to do anything other than spin your wheels while you watch the blog articles scroll by.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think a critical thing, several people have mentioned this, is learning the fundamentals. Understand how packets get forwarded. Understand how forwarding works at both layer 2, layer 3, etc. Learn what the layering does and what it does for you and what it helps you avoid, the problems that you can avoid with that. Focus on areas then that interest you. Is it configuration? Is it DMVPN? Is it whatever it is? Focus on that so that then you learn that at depth. You become the expert. You become the go-to person in that area. And then learn how to learn quickly so that when you run into something where you don't know it, you learn how to learn enough about it quickly that you can then become conversant and then make contacts with other people in that area so that you don't have to learn to the expert level in that area. You can go and use those contacts. So if I know somebody that it's really good in DMVPN, I don't need to be the expert. I can just go ask questions and go, okay, here's the problem. How would you configure this?
Have you ever considered consulting?
That's really, really valuable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing is fundamentals, keep learning, don't stop. Just but take a break. Right, your career is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Mm-hmm. Like I said to you before, you know, my life in the 20s is different to the one in the 30s, to the one I had in my 40s. You don't have to be running at 110% every day of your life. There might be a year or two when you just take a break, you know, go home, be with your babies, you know, take your wife on holiday or, you know, whatever it is, and then have another year where you push hard.
But there's a trick to this as well, right? Which is that as, and I hate to mention the SDN thing, but as I know, as a lot of the products that are coming out there are bringing a layer of very clever abstraction to what's underneath, right? Whether it's a switch fabric or a software-defined WAN, that ability to even understand the underlying principles, where it's just kind of hidden in unicorn dust. Well, this just kind of works. It's a solution. What you need to learn is how to configure it and how to look at the error logs and stuff. And I think someone coming into the industry today has a very interesting career ahead of them if they're involved in these abstractions, because the more you abstract and then you abstract the abstraction and you abstract the abstraction of the abstraction, because things get easier, the less you get to see the stuff underneath. It's why we don't put stuff in, like with the programming analogy again, it's why we don't put stuff in binary anymore and then flick switches to put them in memory registers. We write it in Perl and Python, and especially Python, and and other nice languages like Ruby. But we do that. We've abstracted ourselves. We don't know how the machine really works anymore, right? Is that wrong? Or are we more productive using the abstraction and just learning, just assuming that someone knows how it works? And I wish I knew what the answer to that was, because I feel bad sometimes that I can't write code that optimizes for a processor or something like that.
So you can always go deeper, I think, is your point, right? You can always go to another level and get to the more fundamental. I think the point is get to the fundamentals that provide value. Like if you are able to get to a certain point where you can start, let's take the conversation we had earlier today at Dell. And we've seen companies do this model where they're saying, look, we have this now operating system based entirely on Linux. As you see all these news articles come out about these cool new projects, look at the baseline. What do they have in common? What can I learn at a minimum that will allow me to operate all of those things, at least at a base level, at a beginning level? And for that specific example, learn Linux, understand how to operate a Linux operating system, be a sysadmin a little bit.
I like to think that people who are going to go as a career into networking or programming and automation and stuff do actually have an interest in understanding a little bit more than when I click this, it does stuff.
Yeah.
Right? They actually want to know, well, what actually happened when I did that? And maybe that's the way to start going down that stack.
Yeah.
But you got to pick somewhere to come into that, come into Greg's pyramid, right? I still feel like the pyramid's kind of this way, and I feel like I'm sitting on it and it hurts. But I don't know where you
start. As long as you're not smiling.
No comment.
All right. Moving on that note.
On that note, that's probably enough of that conversation. There's just one final thought for myself. You brought up something that was interesting, and I think it's something that is prevalent in this room, but really wasn't mentioned much, and that is community. Mm-hmm. And so I know that myself as a network engineer, I get challenged by being around people who know more than I do. And so a community like Network Field Day, a community like on Twitter where a lot of us are involved, I hear blogs mention those types of things. It's that whole, iron sharpens iron. As you read or interact with other people who know more than you, it shows you the things you don't know. And so that's kind of the last thought from me, is that I think that community is a big component of that. Obviously, things are changing. Maybe it's not completely different than what it was 30 years ago, but what we're responsible for is changing, but maybe it's not any broader. But I agree, the fundamentals are important, and that's start there and then continue to dive in little by little.